You're at a dinner party surrounded by married couples, and someone asks the inevitable question, "So how's married life treating you?" Watch what happens next. Watch the rehearsed smile spread across the husband's face. Watch him glance quickly at his wife before answering. Watch him deliver the socially acceptable response about how blessed he is, how marriage is the best thing that ever happened to him, how he can't imagine life any other way. Now watch his eyes. Watch the micro-expressions that flash across his face before the mask settles back into place. Watch the slight tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders drop almost imperceptibly, the brief moment of something that looks suspiciously like resignation before he catches himself and commits fully to the performance. That split second tells you everything you need to know about the grand deception Schopenhauer spent his entire philosophical career trying to expose, that human beings are not rational creatures making conscious choices based on honest self-assessment, but rather biological machines executing programs written by forces they don't understand and absolutely will not admit are controlling them. And nowhere is this deception more obvious, more systematic, more violently defended than in the institution of marriage, where men perform happiness with the dedication of actors who've forgotten their acting, who've confused the role with reality so completely that they'll attack anyone who suggests the emperor has no clothes. Let me tell you what's actually happening when married men insist they're happy despite all observable evidence to the contrary. They're not lying in the conventional sense where they know the truth and deliberately communicate something false. They're engaged in something far more sophisticated and far more tragic. They've constructed an entire reality distortion field where their suffering has to be reinterpreted as fulfillment, where their loss of autonomy has to be reimagined as partnership, where their systematic diminishment has to be celebrated as growth, because the alternative, admitting that they've made a catastrophic error in judgment that's going to define the rest of their lives, is psychologically unbearable. Schopenhauer understood that human beings don't pursue truth. They pursue whatever story allows them to continue functioning without confronting the fundamental meaninglessness and suffering that characterizes existence. And for married men, that story requires insisting they're happy, even when happiness by any objective measure has been systematically extracted from their lives and replaced with obligation, compromise, and the slow death of individual vitality. Here's the mechanism at work. And I want you to pay close attention because this is how the deception operates at the neurological level. When a man makes a massive commitment like marriage, especially one that involves significant sacrifice of freedom, resources, and autonomy, his brain has two options. Option 1, acknowledge that he's made a terrible mistake, that he's trapped in an arrangement that's making him miserable, that he's given up essential parts of himself for benefits that don't actually materialize. Option 2, retroactively justify the decision by convincing himself that the sacrifices are actually meaningful, that the suffering is actually growth, that the loss of freedom is actually liberation from the burdens of choice. The brain, being a fundamentally self-protective organ designed to maintain functional coherence rather than pursue truth, will choose option 2 almost every single time. This is cognitive dissonance reduction in its purest form. And it's so powerful that married men will defend their state of captivity with more passion than they ever defended their freedom, will attack anyone who questions whether marriage is actually making them happy, will perform elaborate justifications for why their obvious suffering is actually a form of sophisticated fulfillment that unmarried people are too immature to understand. Schopenhauer called this the rationalization of the will, the way conscious reasoning gets hijacked by deeper biological and psychological imperatives to create post hoc justifications for decisions that were never really rational in the first place. A man doesn't consciously decide that marriage will make him happy and then enter into it based on careful analysis of costs and benefits. He gets swept up in sexual desire, romantic infatuation, social pressure, fear of loneliness, biological programming toward pair bonding and reproduction, and before his conscious mind has time to properly evaluate what's happening, he's made commitments that will structure the rest of his life. The decision is made at a level below conscious reasoning, and then conscious reasoning is recruited to explain why this was actually a good decision, to find evidence supporting the choice that's already been made, to suppress or reinterpret evidence suggesting it was a mistake. This is why arguing with a married man about whether he's actually happy is completely futile. You're not dealing with someone who's honestly assessed his situation and concluded he's fulfilled. You're dealing with someone whose entire psychological architecture is organized around defending a choice that's already been made and can't be unmade without catastrophic consequences. Now, let's get specific about what married men are lying about when they claim to be happy, because the lies are so layered, so comprehensive, so systematically reinforced by social consensus that they've become invisible even to the people telling them. They're lying about their sex lives, pretending that infrequent, obligatory, passionless encounters with someone who's often more exhausted than interested constitute satisfying intimacy. They're lying about their autonomy, pretending that needing permission or negotiation for every significant decision is actually partnership rather than subordination. They're lying about their friendships, pretending they chose to let those relationships atrophy, rather than admitting they were systematically excluded from their single friends' lives and couldn't maintain the relationships under the constraints of marriage. They're lying about their ambitions, pretending they naturally evolved toward wanting stability and security, rather than admitting they had to kill their riskier dreams because their spouse's anxiety about uncertainty made pursuing those dreams impossible. They're lying about their emotional state, pretending the chronic low-grade depression that settles over so many married men is actually contentment, that numbness is peace, that resignation is wisdom. But here's the really insidious part. They're also lying about what marriage was supposed to provide in the first place. Ask a married man why he got married, and he'll give you some combination of love, partnership, companionship, building a life together, starting a family, finding his person. But watch what marriage actually delivers versus what was promised. The love becomes routine affection punctuated by resentment. The partnership becomes a distribution of household labor, where both parties feel they're doing more than their share. The companionship becomes two people managing logistics in the same physical space while feeling fundamentally alone. Building a life together becomes one person's vision being compromised by another person's vision until neither party gets what they actually wanted. Starting a family becomes subordinating both partners' individual needs to the endless demands of raising children. Finding his person becomes being legally and financially bound to someone who may have changed dramatically from who they were when the commitment was made, or who may never have been who he thought they were in the first place. The gap between promise and delivery is so vast that the only way to maintain psychological coherence is to pretend the delivery is actually what was promised, to insist that what you're getting is what you wanted all along. Schopenhauer would recognize all of this as the will operating through delusion to ensure its own continuation. The will, that blind, purposeless force driving all of existence, doesn't care about individual happiness. It cares about reproduction, about the continuation of the species, about using individual consciousness as a vehicle for its own perpetuation. Marriage as an institution serves the will's agenda perfectly. It creates stable pair bonds that increase the likelihood of reproduction and child rearing. It channels male resources and energy toward supporting offspring. It domesticates masculine volatility into socially useful forms. But none of this serves the individual man's happiness. It just serves the species' continuation. So the will has to create mechanisms that make men pursue marriage and defend it even when it's making them miserable. And the primary mechanism is self-deception so thorough that married men genuinely cannot see their own suffering, because acknowledging it would undermine their commitment to the arrangement. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments because I need to know where this message is landing, where men are starting to question the performance they've been putting on, where the consensus around marriage being inherently good is starting to crack. This conversation looks different in Tokyo versus Dallas versus Sao Paulo versus Mumbai, and geography tells me a lot about how much pressure you're under to maintain the lie versus how much space you have to examine it honestly. Let me describe a pattern that's so common it's almost universal, but that nobody talks about openly. A man gets married. For the first year, maybe two, he's running on the fumes of romantic infatuation and the excitement of the new arrangement. He's still got enough energy to maintain the performance of happiness without it feeling like a performance. But somewhere around year 3 or 4, something shifts. The romantic infatuation has completely worn off. The novelty of living together has been replaced by the grinding reality of cohabitation. The sex has become infrequent and routine. The conversations have become predictable. The future has been mapped out in ways that foreclose interesting possibilities. And the man realizes, often in a moment of clarity, that he immediately suppresses that he's not happy, that he hasn't been happy for a while, that he might not become happy again within the structure of this marriage. But he can't say this out loud, not to his wife because it would devastate her and destroy the relationship, not to his friends because they're either single and won't understand or married and performing the same lie he is, not to his family because they'll tell him marriage takes work and he needs to stop being selfish, not even really to himself because acknowledging it fully would require either leaving the marriage or consciously choosing to remain in a situation that's making him miserable. So instead, he doubles down on the performance. He posts happy couple photos on social media. He talks about how lucky he is. He performs gratitude and contentment even as something inside him is slowly dying. He becomes an evangelist for marriage, encouraging his single friends to take the leap, insisting that partnership and commitment are what give life meaning, attacking anyone who suggests that marriage might not be the universal good it's claimed to be. And the more miserable he is, the more aggressively he performs happiness, because the performance is the only thing standing between him and the abyss of recognizing that he's trapped in a situation he chose, but can't escape without massive social, financial, and emotional costs. Schopenhauer would recognize this as suffering denying itself, as the will forcing consciousness to misinterpret its own state to ensure continued service to biological imperatives that don't care about individual well-being. Here's what makes the lie so convincing and so hard to penetrate. It's not just individual men lying about their own happiness. It's an entire social system organized around reinforcing the lie. Married men lie to each other about being happy, because admitting unhappiness would break the consensus that marriage is good and right and necessary. Married women often lie about their husbands being happy, because their own happiness is supposedly tied to their husband's happiness, and admitting he's miserable would mean confronting their role in that misery. Parents lie about their children's marriages being happy, because their children being unhappy would mean they failed to prepare them for successful partnership. Society lies about marriage being the foundation of stability and meaning, because acknowledging that it's often a source of suffering and limitation would require fundamentally restructuring social and economic systems built on the assumption of stable pair bonds. The lie is structural, not just individual, and that's what makes it nearly impossible to challenge without being positioned as broken, bitter, or fundamentally unable to understand what mature people supposedly know about commitment and sacrifice. Let's talk about what happens when a married man encounters an unmarried man who's genuinely happy and thriving, because this interaction reveals the full architecture of the deception. The married man can't simply acknowledge that the unmarried man has made different choices and is flourishing under those choices, because that would imply that marriage isn't necessary for happiness, that the sacrifices the married man has made might not have been worth it, that there are viable alternatives to the path he's locked himself into. So instead, the married man has to delegitimize the unmarried man's happiness. He'll say the unmarried man is lonely, even when he's clearly not. He'll say the unmarried man is immature, even when he's demonstrably more accomplished and self-directed than the married man himself. He'll say the unmarried man doesn't understand real commitment, even when the unmarried man has maintained friendships, pursued difficult projects, and built a meaningful life without needing another person to validate his existence. He'll say the unmarried man will regret his choices eventually, even when there's no evidence supporting this, and considerable evidence that many unmarried people become happier and more satisfied as they age, while many married people become more resigned and quietly desperate. This delegitimization serves a critical function in maintaining the married man's self-deception. If unmarried happiness is impossible, if you can only be truly fulfilled within marriage, then the married man's suffering must actually be some sophisticated form of fulfillment that he's just too evolved to recognize as such, or that requires enduring temporary suffering for long-term rewards that will definitely materialize eventually. Just trust the process. But if unmarried happiness is not just possible, but potentially more accessible and sustainable than married happiness, then the married man has to confront the possibility that he's made an error, that he's suffering for no good reason, that he's subordinated his individual will to an institution that's extracting value from him without providing equivalent value in return. This confrontation is psychologically unbearable, so it must be avoided at all costs. And the primary avoidance mechanism is insisting that anyone who's happy outside of marriage is either lying, deluded, or doomed to future unhappiness that will prove the married man's choices were correct all along. Schopenhauer would point out that this is classic resentment, the psychological mechanism whereby people who've suffered reinterpret their suffering as virtue and attack anyone whose success or happiness challenges that reinterpretation. The married man can't simply be happy in his marriage and unconcerned with how unmarried people are living, because his happiness is contingent on believing that marriage is the only path to genuine fulfillment. If that belief is false, then his happiness is revealed as performance, his fulfillment as rationalization, his choices as potentially catastrophic errors that he's committed to defending because the sunk costs are too high to walk away from. So he has to attack the unmarried man's happiness, has to find evidence that it's shallow or unsustainable or missing some essential component, has to predict future suffering that will balance the cosmic scales and prove that marriage, despite all its obvious costs, is still the superior choice. Now let's examine the specific mechanisms married men use to maintain the lie to themselves, because these mechanisms are sophisticated and operate largely below conscious awareness. First, there's selective memory, where positive experiences get amplified and negative experiences get minimized or forgotten entirely. The married man remembers the good vacation from 5 years ago, but somehow forgets the 3 arguments they had during that vacation about money and schedules, and whose family they were going to visit next. He remembers the occasional great sex, but forgets the months of nothing, or the obligatory encounters that felt more like maintenance than passion. He remembers moments of genuine connection, but forgets the weeks of living parallel lives in the same house, both parties too exhausted or resentful to actually engage with each other. This selective memory creates a highlight reel that bears little resemblance to the actual lived experience, but that supports the narrative of being happily married. Second, there's social comparison with carefully selected reference points. The married man doesn't compare his marriage to thriving unmarried people, or to the best possible version of what his life could have been. He compares it to other marriages that are obviously terrible, to divorced friends who are struggling, to the cultural stereotype of the lonely bachelor eating TV dinners alone. Against these deliberately chosen comparison points, his mediocre or even actively unhappy marriage looks pretty good, looks like success, looks like something to be defended and celebrated. He's not asking, am I happy in an absolute sense or compared to what I'm capable of experiencing? He's asking, am I less miserable than these specific other people I've chosen as reference points? And as long as the answer is yes, he can maintain the fiction that he's doing well. Third, there's the redefinition of happiness itself. The married man stops defining happiness as excitement, passion, freedom, growth, achievement, deep satisfaction, and starts defining it as stability, security, predictability, the absence of major disasters, the successful management of domestic logistics. By this new definition, he can genuinely claim to be happy because he's achieved these things, even though by his previous understanding of happiness, the one he had before marriage fundamentally restructured his psychology, he's absolutely miserable. It's the same trick the wage slave uses when they claim to be happy because they haven't been fired, because their boss didn't yell at them today, because they successfully made it through another week without a catastrophe. Happiness becomes the absence of acute suffering rather than the presence of genuine fulfillment. And once you've redefined the term this way, you can honestly claim to be happy while living a life that's objectively devoid of joy, passion, growth, or meaning. Fourth, there's the investment in the performance itself. The married man has told so many people he's happy, has posted so many photos, and made so many public declarations of love and gratitude, has built such a comprehensive social identity around being happily married, that admitting unhappiness would mean admitting he's been lying to everyone who matters to him for years. The social cost of that admission is so high that it becomes easier to commit fully to the lie, to actually convince himself it's true, than to face the consequences of honesty. His identity becomes fused with the performance to the point where he can't separate who he actually is from who he's been pretending to be. And at that point, the lie isn't really a lie anymore. It's become his reality, even though observers can clearly see the gap between his claimed happiness and his actual state. Let me be very direct about something that's going to make people uncomfortable. The married men reading this who are getting defensive, who are formulating arguments about how their marriages are different, about how they really are happy, about how I just don't understand what mature love looks like. You're proving my point. If you were genuinely secure in your happiness, you wouldn't need to defend it against some random person on the internet, questioning whether married men are as happy as they claim. The fact that this message threatens you, that it requires immediate refutation, that it generates anger or defensiveness, or the need to explain why your situation is different, that's evidence that somewhere beneath the performance, you know I'm describing something real. Genuinely happy people don't need to aggressively defend their happiness. They just live it. They're secure enough in their state that other people's skepticism doesn't register as threatening. The violent defense of claimed happiness is almost always evidence that the happiness is more performance than reality. Schopenhauer would say this is because you're not defending your actual state. You're defending the narrative you've constructed around that state. And that narrative is load-bearing for your entire psychological architecture. If the narrative collapses, if you admit that you're not actually happy in your marriage, then you have to confront a series of unbearable questions. Why did you make this choice? What were you actually pursuing when you got married? Did you get what you were promised? Are you getting anything of value in exchange for what you've sacrificed? Could you be happier if you'd made different choices? Is it too late to make different choices now? These questions are so threatening, so potentially destabilizing to your sense of self and your place in the social order, that it's psychologically easier to double down on the performance, to insist more aggressively that you're happy, to attack anyone who suggests otherwise, than to actually examine whether the performance matches reality. Here's the truly tragic part, and this is where Schopenhauer's pessimism becomes almost unbearably relevant. Even if a married man somehow breaks through all the layers of self-deception, even if he achieves perfect clarity about his actual state and recognizes that he's unhappy and has been for years, what can he actually do with that information? Divorce is catastrophically expensive, emotionally devastating, socially stigmatized, and often leaves him worse off materially than staying married. Staying married while acknowledging his unhappiness means consciously choosing to remain in a situation that's making him miserable, which is psychologically unbearable in a different way. So the self-deception isn't just a bug in the system, it's a feature. It's the only mechanism that makes the situation tolerable. The married man lies about being happy because the truth is too terrible to live with, and the alternatives are too costly to pursue. So he constructs an elaborate fiction where his suffering is actually fulfillment, where his captivity is actually freedom, where his slow death is actually growth. And he defends that fiction with everything he has because it's the only thing standing between him and the abyss of recognizing that he's trapped in a situation he chose but can't escape. Now let's address the question of whether all married men are lying about being happy. Because I'm sure some percentage of you are thinking, surely there are some genuinely happy marriages. Surely not everyone is performing. Surely some people actually found what they were looking for. And you're right. There are probably some small percentage of marriages where both parties are genuinely fulfilled, where the arrangement enhances rather than diminishes individual vitality, where the partnership serves both people's growth rather than subordinating individual will to domestic stability. But here's what you need to understand about those marriages. They're so rare that treating them as the model or the standard or what people should expect is fundamentally dishonest. They're statistical outliers, the result of either extraordinary luck in partner selection, unusual compatibility of values and temperaments, or deliberate structure that doesn't resemble typical marriage at all. Using those outlier marriages to defend the institution of marriage broadly is like using lottery winners to defend buying lottery tickets as a wealth-building strategy. Technically, some people do win, but that doesn't make it a good bet for anyone else. The vast majority of married men are somewhere on a spectrum from quietly miserable to numbly resigned, to performing contentment they don't feel. And the ones who actually seem happy are usually either still in the honeymoon phase before reality fully sets in, or they've achieved such complete fusion between their performance and their identity that they've genuinely forgotten what happiness felt like before they had to redefine it to make their situation tolerable. Schopenhauer would say this is exactly what we should expect, given that marriage as an institution serves social and biological imperatives rather than individual happiness, given that it's designed to create stable child-rearing units rather than to maximize human flourishing, given that it operates according to principles that have nothing to do with whether the individuals involved are actually fulfilled. The institution works perfectly well at what it's designed to do, even while making most participants quietly miserable, and the participants defend it anyway because they're biologically programmed to do so, and socially punished for questioning it. Here's what the lie costs beyond just the individual married men maintaining it. It costs young men who are making decisions about whether to marry based on completely false information about what marriage actually delivers. They see married men claiming to be happy. They assume those claims are honest. They enter into marriages expecting to experience what they've been told marriage provides, and then they discover the gap between promise and reality. But by that point, they're locked in and have to start performing the same lie to the next generation. It costs unmarried men who are constantly being told they're incomplete, that they're missing out, that they need to find a partner and settle down to be truly happy, when in fact many of them would be far happier remaining unmarried but don't have accurate information to make that assessment, because everyone around them is lying about their actual experience. It costs married women who are partnered with men performing happiness while being actually miserable, creating a dynamic where she knows something is wrong but he won't admit it, leading to resentment and confusion and the slow death of genuine intimacy. Most importantly, the lie costs truth itself. It costs our collective ability to have honest conversations about what actually makes human beings flourish, about what arrangements actually serve individual well-being, versus what arrangements serve social stability at the expense of individual well-being. As long as married men continue lying about being happy, as long as we maintain the social consensus that marriage is inherently good and questioning it is evidence of personal failure, we can't have the conversations we desperately need about how to structure relationships in ways that actually serve the people in them. We're stuck in a system where everyone is performing, everyone is maintaining the fiction, everyone is attacking anyone who breaks the consensus, and the result is generations of people suffering unnecessarily because they're following models that don't actually work but that nobody will admit don't work. Schopenhauer's solution, if you can call it that, was radical honesty about the nature of existence and suffering. He didn't believe happiness was achievable in any sustained way, but he believed that clear-sighted recognition of reality, however painful, was superior to living in comforting delusions. Applied to marriage, this would mean married men admitting when they're unhappy, acknowledging the costs of their arrangement honestly, stopping the performance of contentment they don't feel, and either working to restructure their marriages into something that actually serves them, or acknowledging that they're consciously choosing to remain in unsatisfying situations for reasons that have nothing to do with happiness. It would mean unmarried men having access to honest information about what marriage actually delivers, so they can make informed decisions rather than decisions based on romantic fantasies and social pressure. It would mean society as a whole accepting that marriage works for some people and doesn't work for others, that it's one option among many rather than a mandatory rite of passage, that questioning it or opting out of it doesn't indicate personal failure, but might actually indicate unusual clarity about what serves individual well-being. But this kind of honesty is almost impossible to achieve because the forces maintaining the lie are so powerful. Biological programming toward pair bonding and reproduction, economic systems built on the assumption of stable households, social structures that treat marriage as fundamental to adult identity, psychological mechanisms that protect people from confronting their own errors in judgment, and the sheer weight of sunk costs that make it easier to continue performing than to admit you've been living a lie for years or decades. The married man who breaks the consensus and admits he's unhappy faces immediate and severe consequences, social judgment, potential divorce, loss of relationship with children, massive financial costs, being positioned as a failure or a quitter, having his character attacked by people who need him to be wrong so they can continue believing their own situations are fine. The incentive structure is completely backward. Honesty is punished and performance is rewarded. So we get a society full of people lying about their actual experience to maintain a system that doesn't serve them. So what do you do with this information if you're a married man who's starting to recognize the gap between your performance and your reality? First, you stop attacking your own clarity. The fact that you're questioning whether you're actually happy, the fact that this message is resonating with you, that's not evidence that something is wrong with you. That's evidence that you're starting to see through the self-deception that marriage requires. Don't let people convince you that your doubt is the problem, that you need to try harder, that you're being selfish or immature or failing to understand what real commitment looks like. Your doubt is information. It's your actual self trying to communicate with the performed self, and suppressing it just drives you deeper into the lie. Second, you start getting honest with yourself about what you're actually experiencing versus what you're claiming to experience. Stop the selective memory. Stop the favorable comparisons with deliberately chosen reference points. Stop redefining happiness to mean the absence of disaster. Ask yourself honestly, am I fulfilled? Am I growing? Am I becoming more of what I'm capable of being? Or am I managing, maintaining, performing, slowly dying while pretending to thrive? Third, and this is the hardest part, you have to decide whether you're going to continue living the lie or whether you're going to do something about it. Continuing the lie is a legitimate choice if the costs of honesty are genuinely unbearable. If you have young children who would be devastated by divorce, if your financial situation makes leaving impossible, if you've honestly assessed that staying and performing is less suffering than leaving and facing the consequences. But if you choose to continue the lie, at least do it consciously. At least acknowledge to yourself what you're doing and why. At least stop trying to convince yourself that the performance is reality. And if you decide you can't continue the lie, if the gap between performance and reality has become unbearable, then you have to start taking steps toward honesty, even knowing the costs will be severe. That might mean having difficult conversations with your spouse about restructuring the relationship. It might mean individual therapy to figure out what you actually want versus what you've been programmed to want. It might ultimately mean divorce if that's the only way to reclaim your individual will and build a life that actually reflects your values. What this absolutely can't mean is continuing to aggressively perform happiness while being miserable, continuing to lie to yourself and everyone around you about your actual state, continuing to attack unmarried people or divorced people or anyone else whose choices challenge the narrative you've built around your own choices. That path leads nowhere except deeper into self-deception. More years of your one finite life spent performing for an audience that doesn't actually care whether you're fulfilled, as long as you're maintaining social stability. More distance between who you actually are and who you're pretending to be until, eventually, you can't remember the difference and you die having never really lived. Schopenhauer remained unmarried because he valued truth over comfort, valued clear-sighted recognition of reality over socially acceptable delusions, valued his individual will over subordination to institutions that would have consumed it. Whether you marry or not matters less than whether you're honest about what you're experiencing and why, whether you're making conscious choices or unconsciously executing social programming, whether you're living according to your own values or performing according to someone else's script. The married men lying about being happy are tragic figures not because they're married, but because they've lost the ability to distinguish between what they're experiencing and what they're supposed to claim to be experiencing. And that loss of contact with reality is a kind of death that happens while you're still breathing. Write in the comments right now, I choose honesty over performance, because that declaration, even if it's just symbolic, is the first step toward reclaiming contact with your actual experience, rather than the story you've been telling about your experience. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep having the conversations nobody else is willing to have, the ones that challenge the consensus, the ones that cost social approval but gain you truth. Hit that like button because this message needs to reach the men who are performing happiness while dying inside, who who need permission to acknowledge their actual state, who need to know they're not alone in the gap between what they're experiencing and what they're claiming to experience. Keep watching, because what's coming next is going to force you to examine every assumption you have about success, meaning, relationships, and what actually constitutes a life well lived, and you need to hear it before you spend another decade performing a role that's killing you.